Hey y'all, my name's Christopher Farrell and I go here to Trinity Community Church, and I want to share with y'all about a topic that's personal to me, but I think might be personal to you as well, facing anxiety. And so as we dive into this topic on anxiety, for myself, it's been a personal journey, but to get into that, I want to tell a little bit about my story and my testimony of who I am as a follower of Jesus, because I think that really impacts how we face anxiety. So for me, I was blessed to be born into a Christian home and to be raised by godly Christian parents that took me to church, made sure I was into the Bible and to have that from an early age. And so from the earliest memories, I always remember going to Awanas and other programs. And so as a result of their outpouring, along with the outpouring of a lot of other believers into my life, I became a believer, a Christian at the age of 13. And so with that, that's a huge blessing to have when you become a believer at a young age. But then as you're older, you have to face certain challenges that would be different than someone that comes to faith later in life. And one of those big areas of challenges is facing the real world. And what I mean by this is kind of in my own life is that because I was raised in a Christian home and I spent a lot of time in a church environment, I was very much sheltered and protected from the fallen outside real world that you and I live in on a daily basis. And so as I've grown older, I've had to face those in various forms and then also work through those issues. And one of those issues I've had to face is anxiety. And so that's really what I'm here to share and hopefully comfort you if you're facing it, or if you're really struggling and wrestling with this idea of what is anxiety, give some clarity to hopefully give some insight of what that looks like, and then how to look at it from a biblical perspective. And so my story with anxiety happened about 11 years after I came to Christ. So I came to Christ at 13, so I was 24, and at this season in my life, I was in the Air Force, and God had blessed me with a wife and a child. And so really the story that led to me having anxiety was during my deployment, I was really under a lot of stress, and as you can imagine with that situation, and my default mechanism was to just focus in on my work and to keep pressing through day by day, week by week, month by month. And unbeknownst to me, I wasn't really processing what the stress was and the lack of control that was going on with the situations that I was in, and that took a toll on me. And eventually, at the end of my deployment, I ended up breaking down and, as some would call like having anxiety attacks. And this is where I was just in that constant fight or flight, was really on edge on everything, couldn't sleep, and I just kind of broke down. And so in that moment, it was a dark moment and I felt really alone. But you see as you go through that how God works and how perfect his plan is, because when that happened, God had surrounded me with a team as well as a family. I had a loving, supportive wife, had family here, friends, fellow people I served with that came around and helped me stand strong and help encourage me and supported me through that journey. And so that's really an overview with that, and kind of diving into that, where there are kind of like four different parts to that. One is the anxiety is real. And so I know that sometimes some of us may have this thought process, and especially as men, we have this idea that, it's just not real. It's just not, we're going to be in this denial. But that's one of the ways the enemy works. It really, he wants to get into our human nature to pretend things don't exist or try to deny that they exist, and we struggle with that. But anxiety is real, especially if you're going through that or have gone through that. It is a real feeling, that anxiousness, that your body has a physical reaction to outside circumstances or things, whether it's stress or out of your control. And that was my situation. And so I felt the very real aspect of the physical response to anxiety. And then the second part I have with that is that overcoming it when you face anxiety happens in community. And that's really on mine, is as I was going into that moment in that season of really bad anxiety, God has surrounded me with numerous individuals that were there to support and encourage me, whether that was my teammates I was with there in the Air Force, whether again a loving wife who was there to encourage me, the one who was there to help me listen. There I had mentors that would give me godly counsel to help me kind of work through those aspects. And then I had even therapists and counselors kind of give me tools to help me work through recognizing what anxiety looks like and how to address that in life. And then you have the third part of this is that through this, it helps facing anxiety has helped refine and strengthen my faith as a believer. And this is probably, looking at it now from like years on after that season, you see how God was working through that and to make you a stronger person through that. Because before then, as I mentioned, I was going through that season of stress, and I was kind of just avoiding it. I was avoiding the idea of feeling stressed, feeling like things were out of control. And, in my mind, I thought I was doing the right thing, but in reality, I wasn't processing. I wasn't taking time to acknowledge what was really going on. And that's a hard thing for a believer because we are around these Christian circles. We live this life. A lot of times we're sheltered from the real world, but actually like seeing the real world and then facing it, that's something we have to deal with as believers because we're called to be a light into darkness. So that requires us to go out into the world. And when we see that, really just remember how God works in that. And so in that season, it was difficult, but I saw God's light and his handiwork through that because one, he helped give me tools to overcome and face it, but then also he helped build up that community around me. So I have that support network of other people to be able to confide into. And then the fourth part is, especially to you if you're a believer here, but if you're not a believer, this is an opportunity to accept Jesus, is that, anxiety can be overcome and faced in Jesus because we see throughout the Bible, whether it goes from Joshua, we see him, God talks about for him to be strong and courageous and to do not fear, him having to lead the people of Israel into the land that they had been promised. And, it can only imagine the stress and anxiety that he had to face, but God was there to remind him to be strong and courageous and to do not fear. Or we have, the life of Paul when he's talking about in Corinthians about being anxious for the churches. Paul's ministry and its work took a toll on him, and it had profound impact. And you see the heaviness that he carries with that. And in that same passage there in Corinthians, he talks about how his weakness, God turns that into strength and uses that to bring glory and praise. And so you see in Paul's life, he has this, this understanding that, in this weakness, in this like anxiety, he's giving it over to God and surrendering it to him, that God's going to bring about whatever the circumstance is for his glory and for Paul's good. And the same thing for our life as a believer. And then also we see when Paul is writing to Timothy, he calls his spiritual son, we see in 2 Timothy that he talks about not to have a spirit of fear, but have of love, power, and self-control. And Paul is reiterating because from the letters we get from Timothy that he was kind of a very timid, shy, very concerned individual, and with that could possibly be anxiety. But in that, you see how Paul illustrates to him that this is not a spirit from God. This isn't part of the spirit that resides into him as a believer, but is part of the old nature. And he has to wrestle with that and has to, as he talks about in Romans, dying to yourself. And that's part of the challenge of life, is facing this anxiety. And we see that each one of those situations in the Bible that, see how God works in that, or Jesus works in that. And so, when we face anxiety, it's, as a believer, it's really, really anchored in overcoming it in Jesus. And so we're kind of want to wrap this up, and I really want to talk to like the people. One, if you're a person that is supporting or being there for a person that's going through anxiety, whether that's a spouse, a loved one, a friend, a child, whoever it is, just want to encourage you that, and just to like exhort you that anxiety is real. I know it's hard for the people on the outside sometimes to see that, but that person's going through a real battle, a real struggle, and God has placed you in their life to be the person to listen to. And maybe that's, listening to them talk about it or helping them stand up, whether that is, encouraging them to get up and go outside or to go get counseling or to seek godly help, whatever it is that God has called you to in that season. He's placed you there for a reason. And then the second one is to the one that's going through anxiety. I just want to encourage you that, one, you're not alone. I've been there in that dark season, and it may not seem like there's any hope in that moment, but there is light at the end of it. And I see that in my own life because it's been almost 5 years since I've gone through that season of bad anxiety. I still have the scars and the dealing with facing anxiety as I go through issues, but and challenges that life faces. But now I've seen the impact of having tools, having a loving wife, having that support network of godly men around me and counsel and mentors to help me through that so that I can see the bigger picture with that. And ultimately I have the spirit that comforts me in that moment and be able to provide strength as well to be able to stand and go through it. And so again, to the one that's facing it, just don't give up. I know it may seem like this dark, it's like never ending, but just don't give up.